Would you mind if I gave a little public service announcement before my message? I know that I don't do these things anymore, but I really feel compelled to do this, and just at this particular Mass. Back in September, we began a whole new way of educating, forming our young people, our children. For our first through fourth graders, we created a new program which we call Angelic Aces. For our fifth, sixth, and seventh graders, we created a new program which we call Fearless Followers. These two programs are vitally important for the formation of our young people, and they provide an opportunity for our children to learn their faith in a way that helps them at the same time participate in the life of the church through attendance at Mass. There really is nothing more important that we as Catholics do than what we're doing here right now, celebrating the Eucharist. There's nothing more important than that. And one of the things that I, as a pastor, have to really keep in mind, and I do, is that that's the most important thing. And that when our young people are deprived of the opportunity to worship and learn how to worship, they're missing something. And it's no secret that in this day and age, when our young people are not brought to church, as they grow older, they stop coming altogether. Now you might say, well, then why do you let them leave during Mass time? And I've explained this before, and let me explain it again. Because for those of you that are here, the vast majority of you, except the littlest children, are adults. And I can speak to you on an adult level that I can't necessarily speak to, at the same time, children. So they get this message that I'm giving to you in a way that meets their particular age-appropriate needs. Now, to that end, some would say that we don't have CCD anymore. And in a sense, that's true. And those who would say that would go to another parish seeking CCD, because the belief is that's what works. It doesn't. It doesn't. And it doesn't because many of those young children, the vast majority, stop coming to church once confirmation rolls around. We're trying to do something different here. I would encourage you folks, those of you that are here regularly and faithfully, especially at this Mass, and you bring your children so that they can participate in our programs. And our programs are not just for children in the public schools. They're for all of our children in grades 1 through 7. I would encourage you to speak to those friends of yours and let them know that we're doing something different in an attempt to bring children to a greater understanding of what we do here in this place at this time, and also provide them with the education and formation that meets their particular needs that are age appropriate. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Okay. I think it does. You ready? Switch gears. What's your one heart's desire? Did you think about it? Have you been thinking about that desire that you have in the depth of your heart over the course of these last weeks? I suspect maybe you have, but I would bet that most of you have not. And you don't, not because you don't think about it, but rather you don't know what to think about. You haven't a clue. You probably are living life in such a way that you don't even know where to begin to think about what your one heart's desire, because the way life has unfolded for you, your desires are worthless. So why even consider what they could be? And maybe you are even on the brink of despair, and you feel like your heart's desire could never possibly be fulfilled, so why even bother? The truth is, Each one of you, myself included, have been created by God. Each one of you is created by a God who loves you more than you can even begin to imagine. And he has created you with a desire that resides in the depths of your heart. Maybe you have considered what your heart's one desire is, and you've thought about it, and maybe you've begun to even think about it from a different perspective. Not merely a positive thinking, not merely an optimism, but rather with a renewed confidence. You see, because you might intuitively recognize that there's something about positive thinking, there's something about optimism that doesn't seem right. And it's true. Taken to the extreme, optimism says, I will do whatever is necessary to get what I want out of life. I will do whatever is necessary to get what is good for me out of life at your expense, even if that means you must be eliminated. The greatest optimists in the world, in fact, they're the worst, are the great dictators, the Stalins and the Hitlers, because they only sought what was good for themselves and, by extension, for the people that they surrounded themselves with to a degree. They sought what was their desire, what was best for them, at the expense of so many others. No. Confidence is different. It's very different because it helps us to understand that all the goods of this world and all the challenges and difficulties of this life can help to direct our minds and hearts towards God and His plan for us. Confidence helps to build hope. The hope that comes from that one desire of our heart. Maybe you have thought about that, and over these last couple of weeks, you've begun to act on it by the decisions that you make about how you're going to live your life. Maybe you've even begun to fight for that one desire of your heart. And remember, if you have, then you're living in hope. You're building hope in your life. Hope that says, I don't have it yet, I'm not there, but I will get it, I will get there. Our faith teaches us that about God. That hope enables us to see that there is something more for our lives. That God's plan for our lives is yet to be fulfilled. But it is being fulfilled. It is continuing to be unfolded in our lives because there's so much more that He has in store for us. We have to be careful not to fall into presumption that says, well, I've got everything I need. I don't need any more. Besides, what more could there possibly be? There is so much more. We certainly have to be careful not to fall into a cynicism or depression or even despair, which kill desire and erode confidence and prevent us from acting, prevent us from doing what God calls us to do. Last week I asked you to focus on one particular area that is a challenge, something that we all hope for, or at least should hope for at Christmas. You know that one thing. Why can't we all just get along? You know, don't you just want to get along with everybody? You want your children to get along. You want your brothers and sisters to get along. You want to get along with your parents, your teachers, your boss, your pastor. Why can't we all just get along? But it can only happen if we live as God calls us to live, as God designs us to live, in hope that comes from acceptance. We're drawn to this God because He accepts us for who and what we are, because He made us. And that's really our story in Jesus Christ, that He accepts us. Whoever you are, whatever you've done, wherever you've been in life, Jesus accepts you. God accepts you. in growing a relationship then with Him, change in our lives happens, and we become more acceptable to God. And then acceptance also paves the way to influence. So if there's someone that you want to change, accept that person. And in accepting him or her, your influence will help to change that person. I want to take a look at another characteristic that we need to develop if we want to have hope in our lives. You might guess what this character is, that it is an aspect of hope. It's something that we know, but it's something that very few really have. In fact, I'm sure most of you are like me in lacking this one particular characteristic. We read about it in the Bible. In particular, we read about it today in the second reading from the letter of St. James. Now, St. James is essentially the pastor of the community in Jerusalem back in those years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. And he's offering to the church some advice on how to live. Very much like what St. Paul did in these readings and passages that we looked at the last 2 weeks. The difference with James is he doesn't mince words. He tells it like it is. He's very straightforward. Whereas Paul was writing specifically to the Romans, though, James is writing to everyone. So his is a kind of open letter to the entire church. And here's what he says: "Be patient, brothers and sisters, until the coming of the Lord." So we're going to look at patience, because patience is indeed a key characteristic of those who seek to live in hope. Virtually every religious tradition speaks about virtue, the virtue of patience, and holds it in high esteem. Patience is about accepting delay peacefully. It is about remaining calm through disappointments and difficulties. Appropriate here now, it's about not getting annoyed with distractions. It's not getting angry about problems and people or problem people. And I think most surprisingly, patience is about taking care of yourself. But all of that, and beyond all of that, and even more significantly, patience is about endurance through difficulties and adversity. Now, don't you admire people who will come across as being patient? I do. And how many of us find it difficult to be patient? In fact, we find ourselves more often than not being impatient. I do. I know that I can be a very impatient person. I lose patience very easily. Maybe even some of you have encountered my loss of patience. In fact, there are times when, frankly, I just don't want to be patient. I want things the way I want them, and I want them now. Thank you very much. And St. James, in this little passage from his letter, is speaking directly to me and anybody else who are like me, who lack patience. And this is what he says: "See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient with it until it receives the early and the late rains. You too must be patient." Anyone who is into farming knows that there's a right time to plant seeds. And in the Middle East, that time comes after the early rains, because in the dry season the ground gets very hard, and it's not until the early rains come that the ground softens up so that he can plant the seeds, because the ground is now receptive to the seed in a way that it will bear fruit. Imagine a farmer going out at this time of the year here in our area and planting his crops. What would happen? Nothing. Wouldn't grow, because the ground is not receptive to the seed. So there is patience that happens in two distinct ways. This is the first. It's an active kind of patience. He can't just plant the seeds anytime he wants to. He has to wait patiently till the right time. And that's the kind of patience that we need when we actively wait. It's when you know you need to do something, you need to act, but it's all in the timing. I know I have to wait for the right time to have a conversation with my boss or my pastor. And I better wait until I know he's not in a sour mood or I'm not emotionally distressed. It's looking for the best opportunity to pull the trigger on a deal and not act impulsively. It's allowing a relationship to develop and mature through its natural course and not pushing it. It's continuing to look for the right house, the right job, the right school, and not taking something that you're not really sure of. It's about waiting to ask your parents at the right time instead of nagging at them. It's about waiting for God to show you when and how to act. That's the active waiting. And it means preparing for and looking for the right time and place to act. And there's a second kind of patience, and James speaks about this when he talks about the early and the late rains. The farmer plants the seeds and then has to wait again, patiently, for the seed to germinate, the plant to grow and bloom and bear fruit. And likewise, that kind of patience that we must cultivate is the same. It's passive. It's waiting for our work to produce fruit. It's the kind of patience that God loves because it inspires us to prayer. This happens after you have that conversation with your boss or your pastor, and you're waiting for his reaction, and then you accept it. This is after you put the deal in motion, and you're waiting to see how things are going to work out. This is after making your appeal to your parents, and their response is, "I'll think about it." And you say, "Okay," and wait. That's that passive waiting. And there's that active waiting. Active patience and passive patience. And the truth of the matter is, when we're patient like that, hope increases. But they're challenging at the same time. And all too often, when we're challenged by that kind of patience, instead of being patient, we turn to another kind of behavior. And James tells us, do not complain, brothers and sisters, about one another. Complaint is an expression of impatience and dissatisfaction. And I can assure you that I have been the recipient of more than my share of complaints in recent years. And I can tell you, it never feels good. It's unattractive. It's largely unproductive. And quite frankly, it's sinful. At the same time, I must admit that I've done my share of complaining as well. And I can tell you, it ain't good. Indeed, it is unattractive, because who likes to listen to somebody complain? It makes nothing happen. It's unproductive. And I confess my sin. Complaining about your spouse is not going to fix your marriage. Complaining about your boss or your pastor is not going to fix the situation. And likewise, complaining about your employees or your parishioners isn't going to improve the situation either. Complaining about your parents is never going to help you change your relationship with them or get what you want out of them. Complaining about your teachers isn't going to help you get better grades. Complaint is the enemy of patience, and it undermines hope. The difficult thing about overcoming complaining and complaints is that once we get into the habit of doing that, we don't even know that we're doing it. We don't even realize when we're complaining. A couple of years ago, a priest friend of mine who happens to be the auxiliary bishop, one of the auxiliary bishops now in Rockville Center, New York, where our bishop is going to be the leader, so we're losing a bishop, and don't worry, it's not me. Please, don't tell me. On the way out of church, I've had more people tell me that on the way out of church than don't wish that on me, please. Anyway, his friend of mine is a bishop. We were together with another friend, another priest friend of ours, in his rectory. One afternoon, we were kind of hanging out, and I was complaining. And I was forced to admit that I was complaining when he said to me, "John, would you just knock it off? I'm tired of listening to you complain." And I really had to kind of look at myself and say, yo, it was a real kick in the pants. And I had to start realizing that it's just not good. And it doesn't accomplish anything. So this week I have a two-part challenge for you. The first is pay attention to your speech. Catch yourself every time you're tempted to complain. Think of something nice to say, something that's good, uplifting, something encouraging. And maybe even go a step further and ask a family member or a friend to call you out when they hear you complaining. That's the first. The second challenge is watch out who you associate with. Who are your friends? And do you find that all they ever do is complain about things that they have no control over, things that they can't do anything about? Let them know it. Tell them to stop. Because it is unattractive. It is unproductive. It's not good. I might also just add this little side note, kind of a footnote here, because I'm sure some of you might be thinking, well, what about legitimate complaints? The wrongs that happen to us in life. Well, those wrongs indeed, they do happen, and they need to be corrected. So, you know what? A couple of things. First of all, be sure it's a wrong that needs to be corrected, and then approach it cautiously and remain positive, because you can accomplish more with sugar than you can with vinegar, right? Our goal ought to be to live completely free from complaining, and instead to live deep-seated sense of patience. Complaint bemoans the present and the past. Patience looks forward to the future with hope. Complaint drains everyone's energy. Patience increases it. Complaint is an expression of doubt and undermines our relationships. Patience is an expression of trust and faith, and ultimately grows our relationship with God and also one another. Complaint robs us of joy. Patience cultivates joy and hope. This third Sunday of Advent is Gaudete Sunday. That word, gaudete, is a Latin word that means joy. And I wear rose vestments today, not the dark, somber color of violet, but the brightness of rose, to show that joy, that hope that we look forward to as we wait patiently for Christmas. And remember this, hope is rooted in God's victory over sin and death, and in and through and with and in Jesus, we share that victory. So this Gaudete Sunday comes as a reminder that God is in control, and His timing is perfect. Just be patient.